Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our space in Fundación Telefónica. Teresa Rivera, Vice President and Minister for the Ecological Transition, the Minister of Universities, and Jeffrey Sachs, the President of the SDSN. Welcome to this space, and thank you for having chosen us to discuss this important topic from Fundación Telefónica. We have been working for over 20 years in domains that we would be sure that the United Nations would include among the SDGs, and in this Agenda 2030. We are working in more than 40 countries, focusing in projects aimed at improving education in vulnerable areas, and also to promote education in all fields, training for employability, and counseling, and also support for those people who are at risk of social exclusion. We are doing this because we are convinced that technology is an ally for the well-being of people, and we do this also at the hardest time of the pandemic, and also we keep contributing in a cooperation effort to support the victims of the Ukrainian war. We know the effects of all this change crisis that we are enduring, and the negative impacts that they have and that they will continue having for development and for the achievement of the goals that we have set for ourselves for sustainable development. And this is why we also share the motto of this meeting today, the idea of a social contract, that we believe it's absolutely key. Our President, José María Álvarez Pallete, a few months back, and just before the spread of the pandemic, a pact that was based on these sustainable development goals, such as a defense of equal justice, social justice, and among others. We need big agreements. We cannot achieve all our goals by ourselves. We cannot work in silos. Everything is interconnected. And as the goal 17 states, we need to find alliances in order to be sustainable in our impacts. We know that there are many levers to reduce poverty, to improve the gender equality, and there are many things that also intervene in the sustainability of the economy and to fight climate change, for instance. We believe that it's our responsibility of all of us to work so that among all the crises that we are going through, the result is not the same as it has been over history, that this becomes a danger for thousands or millions of people and an opportunity for just a few. We are convinced that the work that we are doing will help us obtain better results for the biggest number of people around the world, and that this can become an opportunity for the greatest number of people around the world. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this event for discussing the results of the report on the sustainable development. This is an international report that for 7 years has been presenting the performance of all the member states of the United Nations regarding the SDGs. We are very pleased that this has raised so much interest. Aside from the people who are here today, we are being followed in streaming by many others from different places. As you know, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and the Spanish Sustainable Development Network are working in order to achieve the means to achieve the SDGs. We are working on learning together and overcoming the silos, the division into silos, to promote strategies that are global and that allow us to face all the challenges that we are facing that are becoming more and more complex every day. This network is a sort of alliance, but we also incorporate different actors, different agents that share our mission and are aligned with our goals. Some of them have supported us in preparing this event, and I would like to thank them. First of all, to this General Secretariat of the Ministry Foreign Affairs Ministry, who have given us great support and who have participated in the presentation of all our reports. Eva Del Hoyo, the Director General, will give us, I will leave the floor to her so that she can give us a welcome. Also, we would like to thank the promoters of the El Día Después initiative that, since it was created, has become a platform for discussion and for action to promote Agenda 2030. And also thank you to Fundación Telefónica for welcoming us in this space. This is not the first time that we find ourselves celebrating an event in this space, and I hope it will not be the last. Thank you to all the speakers, and thank you in particular to Jeffrey Sachs, President of SDSN. It's a real luxury to have you over here today. Thank you very much. Teresa Rivera, Vice President and member of the Leadership Council of the SDSN. Thank you very much. Thank you for your support to the network. Also, thank you to Joan Subirats, the Minister of Universities, and for his idea of the role of universities in supporting sustainability, which is very much in line with our own vision. Thank you also to Enrique Santiago, the State Secretary for the 2030 Agenda, who will be delivering some words at the end of the event. Our agenda for today is very tight, and we will try to stay as close as possible to the time we are allowed. For now, I will leave you with a representative of the REDS that will give us certain key ideas that will help us frame the debates that will follow. The first debate will be between Teresa Rivera and Jeffrey Sachs, and then Leire Pajín will invite the rest of the participants so that we can have multiple actor debate on the way we can build a new social contract that helps us achieve the sustainable goals. I hope that you will enjoy this as much as we have enjoyed preparing it, and I will leave the floor to the representative of the REDS.
Pues muchas gracias, Candela.
Thank you, Candela. Thank you to the Minister and all the authorities here present. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. Years later, I have remembered some of the presentations when I was part of the audience, and I remembered all the presentations of these reports that we have attended to, once that we have approved the agenda in a more academic fora and also more connected to the businesses. It has been a long path, and from the Foreign Affairs Ministry and from the State Secretariat, we have always tried to support this report, and not only support this report, but also use it as a reference for us to carry out our work. And one of the things that I would like to highlight, it's that from the DG Poldes, which is the agency that has supported the 2015 agenda, as we used to call it, and now the 2030 agenda. We were already leading these actions, and all the planning and everything that is part of our work here is also incorporated into 2030. And for us, the SDSN is a part of the work that we do in the ministry. This is a very special year for Spanish cooperation. As you know, we are working on a law at a Congress level, and I believe this law is an advancement, a development in the way we understand cooperation, and this is very much connected to the peer-to-peer analysis of Spanish cooperation, where it is highlighted that something that distinguishes us from the rest of the countries is the way we understand alliances, the way that we establish an exchange with the partner countries, and the way we try to achieve different ways to attain the SDGs. And the foreign side to this cooperation is the most relevant for us. And in this way, I have to say that the report has been very interesting for us, because it shows that it is the alliances that will allow us to achieve the SDGs. And it's the SDGs 1 to 16, and also the implementation means that put together the private sector, the trade unions, the public sector, and all the actors that need to intervene to materialize the 2030 agenda. And this is part of the work that we're doing to get everyone together to work for these goals. We try to determine which are the goals and to have an intense work with the regional authorities. And I see that I see, for instance, the mayor of the town of Fuenlabrada and other municipalities that we try to work with and establish alliances with. And I don't want to take too much of your time, but I hope that this law will be passed this year, and it is part of the path that will take us to the path of the 07. I think I'm not that so happy in this sense. I think that everything is connected, everything is global. The COVID, the war in Ukraine, everything has consequences that can be easily foreseen, and that these consequences are global. So as we have done with vaccines, for instance, we need to work together. Now we are working towards the presidency of the EU, and we are going to choose many subjects, many topics, and one of them is the development of a social contract, that we need to never forget this social dimension, that I think it's very relevant. And we're looking forward to seeing new versions of this report that will serve us as a basis for our future work. And now I will leave the floor to Maria Cortés, which is a representative of the REDS.
Muchas gracias, Eva.
Thank you very much, Eva. Good afternoon, everyone. I will be introducing the first conclusions, or the main conclusions of this report, and also the Spanish results. We will be starting with the bad news. For the second year in a row, there has been no development towards the achievement of the SDGs at a world level. If we see the average of the advances towards the SDGs, we see that there's a stagnation. As the president of the foundation has mentioned, the multiple crises that we have seen changed, the climate crisis, the wars, and this geopolitical conflicts have entailed a step back in terms of the sustainable development at a world level, at a global level. We see that these crises are continuously being reinforced. Obviously, the war in Ukraine has a humanitarian cost that is extremely high, but it is also having different consequences at a global level. For instance, the increase in the price of energy, and also the uncertainties regarding the food availability. This is also being strengthened or reinforced due to the extremely grave or serious heat waves in India, for instance, or in the sub-Saharan Africa, where these food insecurities are more severe. They're suffering droughts and plagues that are really devastating the crops. So we see that these crises are being reinforced, and they're really stopping the advancement of the Sustainable Development Agenda. All these countries who are the most vulnerable are also the ones that find it more difficult to find the resources to face this crisis, and obviously to implement this transformative agenda. I'm sure that Professor Sachs will speak about this in detail, but we are calling for the establishment of a sustainable development plan at a global level. We're also analyzing the efforts and the commitments from each of the governments towards this agenda, and we see that halfway when we are going towards the mid-20s, we see that we would like everyone to be rowing in the same direction, but this is not actually happening. High-income countries are having ancillary effects or spillover effects on other countries, and we have been analyzing this in our report very rigorously, although it is hard to determine the spillover impacts. And we have also developed an index, let's call it the International Spillover Index, where we can see that the high-income countries have socioeconomic impacts that are very serious, and also environmental impacts that are very serious due to unsustainable supply chains and consumption patterns that are also unsustainable. And just to finish this round of conclusions with a positive note, we have also seen that during the pandemic, there have been coming up certain alliances, transformative alliances, and certain mechanisms that might be the sort of lever effect that can be needed to accelerate the implementation of the agenda. We have a clear example in Spain called El Día Después, the day after, of such alliances. In our report, we talk about the data for sustainable development and how the data providers have been forced during the confinement periods to innovate. And what they've done is to accelerate the use of Earth observation technologies. They have used non-traditional data acquisition, and they have used mobile technologies, and they have also accelerated the use of data visualization techniques. This makes these data more accessible for the citizens, for the decision makers. And we believe that this might be a breaking point, a turning point, making this agenda a more transparent tool and facilitating the responsibility of the actors. Here you can see the stagnation that I was mentioning before, and I have used to the same pattern to establish the Spanish graph. We see that there have been ups and downs in the past years, and right now we are seeing a development and improvement even during the crisis. Here we can see the first 20 countries in terms of their scores and their ranking towards achieving the SDGs, and the ones that are the worst positions. Some of these countries are having to deal with extreme poverty, the impact of climate crisis and environmental degradation, and sometimes they have to deal with also wars. In the first positions, as always, we see the Nordic countries, and we have seen that Spain has gone several positions up and raising above many of the countries in that are our neighbor countries. There are still many challenges to overcome in order to achieve the SDGs, in particular those goals that are more connected with the environment, from the 12th SDG to the 15th. At a domestic level, and also because of the spillover effect on other countries, SDG 2 regarding the food systems that are unsustainable, and the SDGs related to inequalities are particularly difficult for these countries who are worst positioned. This is the situation for Spain, and it's very similar to the one that we saw last year. We see that there are 3 goals in red. 2, 8, 13, and 15 of the goals are marked in red. But if we see the trends, which are the arrows that you can see on the right of each of the goals, we see that there is an improvement in each of these goals. And in 3 of them, they are improving at a pace that point out to the achievement of these goals at the suggested dates. In December this year, we are presenting the European. Last December, we were looking at the plan for recovery and resilience in Spain. And one of the conclusions of this study was that this was perfectly based on the SDGs, and it's actually very much in line with these SDGs in a very robust manner also. It's important because the 4 goals that are in red in Spain are included in the recovery plan, both in terms of budgets and in terms of the measures and the ambitious commitments that have been undertaken towards the Commission. Probably the Vice President would like to deal with this topic in detail, but I believe that we are probably at a main turning points. There are big opportunities right now, and the third component is focused in the recovery and resilience plan that is focused in the food systems, and I think the budget is above 1 billion euros to transform the system. More than 35% of the funds for these plans are aimed at measures that are related to the goal number 13, everything that has to do with ecosystems and biodiversity, which is covered by component number 4, which has a funding of 1.6 billion euros. And so we need to look at this panel, and it will probably change in the coming years. For this, we need a very strict commitment from the different government levels, and we also need different measures that facilitate the proper implementation of this plan. Every year, we look at the inclusion of the SDGs in all the legal frameworks and the public policies, the public budget, and all the governmental structures, the sector plans. And this year, we have started a sort of pilot index in order to determine the trend of each of the countries. We see that Spain is among the countries that are faring better in terms of the SDGs, but they are also much committed to this agenda. I will not go into detail in all the aspects that we look at, but this is another way of presenting the data. As you can see, Spain is highly committed. It's among the countries that are highly committed. This is at a national level, but we should also analyze the commitment from the different autonomous regions and the cities, because they will be key for the implementation of these actions. There are countries in the G20, such as the United States, Brazil, or Russia, who are among the countries who are very little committed, their commitment is very low. And just to finish, I would like to mention the effects that Spain has around the world, the spillover impact that we have around the world. As Eva said, the help or the aid to development is still very far from that 0.7%. And we also see that the main indicators that are marked in red are related to the products that we consume in Spain that have been manufactured in other countries, which create CO2 emissions and environmental degradation in those countries. So we are not dealing only with the national implementation of all these actions, but also the effects in other countries. Just to wrap this up, I would like to mention the platform where you can see all the results. You can see here all the data from different countries. You can compare different countries. You can look at the information from each of the goals viewpoint. And if you need further information, please, you can find my email at the bottom of the screen. And I would like to invite Leire Pajín, who is the president of the REDS, and she will be inviting the rest of our speakers onto the stage.
Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again to Fundación Telefónica for welcoming us here today, and thank you to all of you who are here with us today in this discussion, in this debate where we are having different actors. And thank you also to all those who are following this debate through the new technologies, because these virtual spaces allow us to reach very far and wide.
Querida vicepresidenta.
Dear Vice President, thank you for being with us today and for helping us push this agenda in a very clear manner. This year we are presenting the yearly report of the SDSN, and also we are seeing how Spain is faring at a moment that is a complex time, complex due to the different crises that we are seeing that are interconnected and that are complicating not only the advances in achieving the SDGs, but also we are seeing the real impact that these conflicts, these crises are having. And there is a paradox that I would like to discuss with this panel of high-level guests. We are seeing that this transformative process is on its way, but at the same time, we are seeing that the 2030 agenda and the SDGs are the only possible way out. They are, again, the single roadmap that was already telling us of all the things that we are actually going through today. So we find ourselves in this sort of crossing where we want to keep progressing and keep building, also at the same time focusing always on the 2030 agenda. So I would like to discuss this first with Jeff. He is leading this network at a global level. He is also an advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations. He's also leading from the academia and the universities this bet on knowledge. I would like us to to discuss this crossing. How can we be able, in this complex environment and context, that we are still needing to ensure that 2030 agenda is being pushed among the most important priorities for governments, and so also how can we respond to the emergencies that we have on the table at this moment in our societies, while at the same time keeping on with the transformation that we need for the future.
Gracias a todos.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to everyone, and sorry because I don't speak Spanish. I'm going to speak in English.
Very, very happy to be with all of you, and congratulations to Spain on all its accomplishments, and to your wonderful Vice President who is leading so much of the transformation. It's really impressive, and you saw the graph keeps going up. This is not a small thing. This shows real progress in the midst of a lot of upheaval in the world. But Spain is really doing extremely well. And actually, if you look at the scores, extremely well. In a way, the most important score of all is actually SDG 16, which is living in a peaceful, inclusive society. And it's all nearly perfect scores. Thank you. I'm coming from a country that's such a mess. It's so nice to walk around Madrid and to see people out and having a good time. No one shooting each other. I'm coming from a very weird place right now. So Spain is doing very well and making the transformation. The places that are in red, which for us is the traffic light where there are still things to do, well, they're mainly the environmental side, of course, because this is where the hard transformation is, and which Spain is making systematically. I'm sorry to mention one other red point. The only other one is what we call the trophic level of eating. You really like meat, red meat. So you get a high score on eating lots of red meat. That's just about the only, I'm not going to even go into that anymore. But other than that, you score extremely well. And on the ones where you are not scoring, one part I know well, which is the energy transformation, where really you have fantastic leader in this because we worked together for many years on what a long-term pathway should be, and now you're showing the world how to make one and how to actually do it. The other is on land and biodiversity. I have questions on that. I don't know what the status is in Spain on some of those issues, protected ocean areas and protected land areas. So that's a little bit of a question mark. But on the broader global scene, we're in a mess because we do not take care of ourselves at all well globally. And Europe is one corner of the world that has done quite well on this up until this year's disaster of the war. And I just want to see peace as soon as possible because Europe's not good at war, got out of the habit of it, thank God. I'm not happy with Germany remilitarizing and blah, blah, blah. This is just, no, don't do this. You're on the right track. Demilitarize, make peace, negotiate, which is what we should have done with Russia beforehand, and continue on leading the world in sustainable development. And I don't know why Europe's so good at it, but I think there are two parts to this from my point of view. One is that this agenda really needs cooperation among neighbors. No country can do this by itself. And if you're in the habit of lots of negotiation with neighbors like the European Union is, it really helps because you know, my God, we have to talk to our neighbors all the time. And that's helpful for this transformation. And I think the same thing is actually true with the parliamentary systems of Europe, which is they tend to be coalition governments, many with 5 or 6 parties. And while that's very complicated in politics, it's so much better than what we have in the United States, which is 2 parties just shouting at each other. They don't negotiate, they don't discuss, they're just who can grab power and who can't. Whereas in Europe, I think there's so much negotiation going on all the time. Nobody can quite move too decisively one way or another because it really is consensus building all the time. And what we're learning and what we were just discussing with your vice president before coming into the room, at the beginning of this energy transformation, I talked to the engineers, I talked to, by the way, economists don't know very much about anything, but they should talk to people who do, like the engineers, who can lay out the big picture. And the engineers explain what this would all be about. And then the discussion, well, it should be socially fair and so forth. And of course, I'm in favor of that. I like that. But I thought, it's not the main thing. The jobs are not the main thing of this energy transformation. It's what kind of power plant you have or what kind of car you drive. But the truth of the matter is that the social dimensions are, of course, always important, but they can stop this transformation at any moment if you're not completely attentive to them. So small communities can say, no, we're not doing such and such, and stop the whole national transformation. And that's important for me as an economist also to remember. That's why when I came as soon as Vice President Rivera was in office, and she told me about, I'm going to the coal district, I'm going to here, I'm going to there, because it's so complicated socially. From the very first moment, that was the key to the agenda, was just, we're going to have to negotiate this. We're going to have to understand local context. We're going to have to make sure this fits well. And the SDGs start with the slogan, no one left behind. And so you're really doing that. And you're showing that with attention to that, you can overcome every obstacle through this kind of negotiating process. So my long-winded point is, we need that kind of cooperation at the global level. And that's the most important thing that's missing. And for my country, the United States, The most important problem in the United States is we forgot how to listen to anyone else, within our country and internationally. Everything is bollocksed up as a result. We had a summit of the Americas last week. 8 countries didn't come because we're so dumb. We don't even know how to have a party and invite people. We say, you can't come, you can't come, you can't come. And then the others say, well, if my friend can't come, I'm not coming. Well, if that one's not coming, I'm not coming. We had 8 countries not coming. This is dumb because we're not talking to each other, because we couldn't even have the idea that the president of Nicaragua could come to Los Angeles. So this is one part of what's wrong. And then we don't talk to China. Please talk to China. They're 20% of the world. They're the single largest economy in the world. I was very happy on the Gran Via to see Huawei. I haven't seen a Huawei store because in the United States, it's not allowed. And if I went into one, I'd be called all sorts of terrible things. But we went in because I haven't been in a Huawei store in a long time. But my point is, talk, negotiate, even with Russia, by the way, honestly. We need to discuss these issues everywhere because that's how we're going to overcome the obstacles. And if we do, final point that I would say right now is that the engineers are really good, whether at Iberdrola or other places. They know how to actually make smart grids, how to actually get things done, put things in place. So my little neck of the woods as an economist is to help finance this stuff and to help bring more funding to the solutions, which I'm trying to do with the UN leadership right now, because almost all the saving ends up in the rich countries in the world, and the poor countries get nothing. And by the way, then we take from the poor countries, just terrible. I was in Democratic Republic of Congo 2 weeks ago. All we've done is pillage that country for 150 years, taking out the resources and leaving nothing there. So we need to finance the transformation, but most importantly, we need to talk with each other, because if we're negotiating, not fighting, we're actually going to succeed. Thanks.
Thank you. Negociación. Pueden aplaudir, ¿eh?
Don't hesitate to clap. Please don't hesitate to applaud. Jeff was saying cooperation, collaboration, agreements from different ideologies, from different outviews, the need of including different societies in a common plan, which is not always easy, as we will discuss with Vice President, the imbalances between the cities and the rural areas, between the north and the south, the need to build spaces where we can get together different actors, different visions, is the way to start this path from the SDSN. And also it's the complexity that lies there that makes it very complex to start. And I would like to discuss with Vice President that in the case of Spain, as we have seen in the report, we have gone a long way, and there's a certain difference that we need to highlight. For instance, the reduction in emissions and all the sustainable policies that have been implemented through the use of different funds and high-level politics. And also the report points out that we do not need to work only with the policies within our borders, but also considering the spillover effects that we have in terms of the emissions that we create and our role in the world with regards to other countries. So I would like to ask you, Teresa, how do you think that we need to keep pushing for this big transformation, and where are the key elements that we are still missing to undergo this path? Well, thank you very much. I think I will say more or less the same things that Jeffrey has said, but maybe in a different way. I think that the capacity of creating these alliances and to participate, I believe in that. There are two very important things that are complementary. One of them is to have a clear idea of where we want to get. That is to say, it's not a fixed idea, but we need to share a horizon. And we need to have this at a national level, at a regional level, and I think it's also important to talk at a global level. There's another thing that I believe it's very important, and that is to think that such an important and deep transformation in such a short time cannot be accomplished if there are communities that feel that are more vulnerable if this transformation takes place, and that feel threatened by these changes. It's difficult to think about changing economic or environmental pattern because in the long run we can create certain inequalities. So when we work on the recovery plan in defining it first, and also it's been complicated to implement this recovery plan, but we are very hopeful. And our idea was, what are the big changing trends that we want to promote, and how can we support this so that we can ease this transformation in the productive system? How can we profit from being more intelligent in analyzing data, in education, in the sharing of knowledge, having both a social and economic implications? And also we had to consider that our views were somewhat different from that of other European countries, and how can we come out of this crisis that, as other crises, tends to affect more the most vulnerable groups, and that creates more inequalities, for instance, in terms of gender, and how can we also pay attention to this great split, this great gap between the cities and the rural areas? Obviously, in the cities there are great inequalities within the cities, but it's very dangerous to have second-class citizens, mainly for democracy. And I think we need to take this into account, because when we are dealing with these alliances, we would not be having the whole picture in front of our eyes. And you have mentioned something that I find very important, and this is also reflected in the annual reports, and it's the cascade effects. We're not bubbles. Each country, each society not only has linkages between or inside the territories, but also sometimes we have connections in very far away countries. And one of the goals that is marked in red in the report is the increase of the imported emissions. That is to say, how we are incorporating these emissions that we are not creating within our territory, but by the import of other products or services that we get from other countries. Or how can we incorporate also the nitrogen emissions through the input of products and services that are manufactured or delivered in other countries. And I think this is important also when we analyze the case of Ukraine. We see that there are certain cascade effects, for instance, having to do with the food security and safety, that are much more serious in other countries, or the change of the energy providers, energy suppliers, that will put our societies at risk. And obviously in Europe, our situation is not as complicated, but the supply can be at risk also for other countries that are more vulnerable. And we need to take into account this interdependence. And also there's another thing that we have discussed often, and the Minister Subirats knows about this, and it has to do with the question that we need to ask ourselves: is the society ready to absorb these capacities? Do we have the skills to absorb the public debate and to take into account if the qualification that is so important, and there's a part dealing with the debate based on indicators and information that helps us think better. If we don't take this into account, we might follow irrational trends, or we are more easily we are vulnerable to manipulation because we have not developed the right skills. And I think this is an important element that we need to take into account from the institution's viewpoint, and how they can create these spaces and what things are at risk.
Yo creo.
My last remark is that I think that is the social dimension, the human factor, the engineers that Jeffrey was speaking about, the economists that Jeffrey was speaking about. They are people that are able to decide on a piece of paper in a room. But there is a very important thing, and this is the human factor. And this is, I mean, it's not very easy to capture this in a paper. So how can we capture this human factor? I mean, it's not very clear, but I'm sure that one of the things that is very important is that people feel the benefits of what's being done, because if they don't, they will say, and why am I going to get involved in this? Because when we're doing this, things don't change, and this is very important when defining policies. I mean, why? If there are benefits, they are not social immediately, so that people can see that it is something that makes sense. And of course, nothing happens immediately on a very short term, but many things do. And I think that this is another topic that we need to take care of. The Vice President was saying something that we think is very important. How from every point, from every field, how we can accompany a society that has to pay attention to who can feel that is losing in this bet, to find the balances in order to include these groups of people that maybe could feel that this agenda has nothing to do with them, or maybe this agenda could be negative for them, and especially how we can draw some conclusions that can happen in order to avoid them from happening, or in order to be prepared and to find the social impact. How can we create this sustainable development culture? Well, citizens have the tools and the information that are necessary to get involved in this deep transformation, because without them, we can't do it. We'll have the chance to talk to some citizens that have participated in first in line in this assembly. This has been, we've tried to empower citizens and to make them understand. And in this context, Jeff, I would like to go back to this call that we make in the report. This is about, well, in this specific, this perfect storm of different crises, I mean, this is having a double and triple impact on the SDGs fulfillment. So how can we make people understand that we need a new social contract on a global scale that is able to mobilize the financial resources that are enough, I mean, to avoid them to be to refocus the efforts and to keep the financial effort towards the development, towards the renegotiation of the debt, to the access to credit to the less developed countries. I mean, this mobilization that we need so that we can guarantee that this progress is balanced for the countries that are at the bottom in this SDGs fulfillment, that they need these tools.
I think that there are two issues about these very big crises that we're facing right now. One is we need to solve the immediate crisis. For example, the war in Ukraine is having devastating consequences for Ukraine, obviously, and it's having very, very significant consequences for the rest of the world, especially with this sanctions regime and all of the consequences of that. There was a report a few days ago by the UN saying it's the worst shock in decades. I can tell you there's no way to overcome this shock other than ending the war. So everyone can dream that we're going to help this region or that region, and we're going to help the poorest people, and we're going to solve this food crisis. don't believe any of it. In order to end the crisis, we have to end the war. And so the question for our leaders is, well, how are you going to end the war? And then what they tend to say is ridiculous. Well, we're going to defeat Russia on the battlefield. No, it's not going to end that way. We can see it because as they say this every day, Russia keeps taking more land and more territory and more of Ukraine's economy. So we need a better strategy. We don't have a strategy. President Biden just doesn't want to be blamed for something. So he doesn't want to negotiate. He's got elections in November. I don't think they have a strategy. So I want a strategy. My own view of the strategy is we negotiate. One of our provocations, which was the idea of NATO enlargement, should be taken off the table, and we make some reasonable solution, respecting actually both sides, not just talking as if we're going to defeat an enemy. It's too simple-minded. We need to solve these problems, not just have an escalating war. So that is just an example that with these big shocks, we need to address them. Similarly, COVID is another long story. I won't go into it, but I chaired a commission for the last 2 years on COVID, a global commission. We could have done so much better through global cooperation than we did. There are many things I'd like to say, but I won't get distracted. Then comes beyond that. Beyond that, the world is divided. It's divided conventionally into 4 levels. The rich world, here we are. The second is the upper middle income world. Think of China or think of other rather high income countries, Chile, for example, and so forth. The lower middle income world, Indonesia, India, and the low income world, where my wife and I were a couple of weeks ago in Democratic Republic of Congo, where 90% of the population doesn't have electricity, for example. It's unreal for 100 million people. So I don't worry at all about the rich world in some sense because all the resources are there. And yes, I worry about how crazy my country is, but other than that, then that we should get along. But other than that, I'm not worried about the resource base there. For the upper middle income countries, I'm basically also not very worried because they have what they need. People are not suffering from the most distress. And the big strategy for an upper middle income country to become a high income country is invest in knowledge. This is the main investment. Good universities, train your scientists, your engineers, have a lot of kids go on to higher education, you'll do fine. Invest in research and development. This is what China's doing to become as successful as it is. I worry about the bottom half of the world, which is the lower middle income countries, which is a lot of people, about 3 billion people, and the poorest, which is about 1 billion people. It's actually about 800 million, 3.2 billion, but it's almost exactly the bottom half of the world. We don't think of them very much in the rich world. In the United States, not at all, believe me. Don't care at all. Europe, a bit more, but not in a very organized way, by the way. Lots of money spent, not so much money, but more as a share of income, but not with a great strategy, I have to say. And you have Africa with 1.4 billion people to the south of Europe, growing at a rapid population growth, and Europe doesn't have any strategy how to help ensure that Africa doesn't just have a massive expansion of population and no development, which is the trajectory right now, by the way. Because with climate change and a population that's going to double in the next 30 years, double. I'll say it again, 3 billion people. What's your strategy? No good strategy. Let me give you one good strategy. Europe and the African Union should partner on one basic idea. Every African child should get a decent education. Just do that. It would be the most transformative thing imaginable for development and for you and for Africa. And the issue is the African countries can't afford that on their own, strange as that may seem. They can't actually afford right now to keep every child through high school. I know, I do those numbers all the time. It would be 25% of GDP because it's 40% of the population. It's so many young people. And it costs money. And there aren't so many teachers, and we need to put electricity in the schools and some materials and other things. So why do I give this example? Because if we were thinking a little bit ahead, we'd make a plan. And then we would finance it. And it could even be financed on loans by the European Investment Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Doesn't even have to be grants, but it needs to be a strategy. So the hardest part for the poor countries is the rich world doesn't get it, doesn't understand what's happening. I travel between the two worlds almost every week like a ping pong ball. You can't imagine the deprivation that so many people face and then come back to the lack of any kind of focus. It's worse when I go back to the United States because we could go years at a time without mentioning development other than stop the immigration. That's the only thing that American officials know. They can't think of anything else right now except cut the aid and put a wall on the border. So we've got to do better than this. And here's what I'm recommending in general. And it seems it's actually quite simple, but getting anything done is quite hard. I'm recommending that we commit in the rich world to an increment of $1 trillion a year flow of investment funds to the poor half of the world by 2025. And $1 trillion sounds like a lot of money, maybe. But the world economy is now $110 trillion of output per year. That's called the gross world product. So what I'm advocating is 1% of world output shifted as loans, not even grants, not even gifts, loans, but at reasonable terms, through institutions like the European Investment Bank. And interestingly, Europe and Africa announced a big project. I'm putting it to a test in my own test. The European Global Gateway, it's called, which is supposed to fund this kind of development in poor countries. And so I have a good project because the president of DRC asked me to come look at what they should do, a country with no electricity. And they have probably the best hydroelectric power potential in the whole world on the Congo Basin, which is an enormous river. And they could generate about 40 gigawatts of power through these fantastic falls near the Atlantic Ocean called Grand Inga. And you could do half that project for a cost of about $30 billion, providing electrification for 50 million people. So that's 1/10 of what Europe has announced in its project. and it would electrify the center of Africa and at least 50 billion people. So I'm now checking around Europe whether anyone's interested or whether that's just a headline. Is that a headline or is it a real project? In my business, I've been at this for 41 years, you never know. Mostly it's a photo op and a headline. It's not a real project. But if it is a real project, I have a great project. So I'm trying to sell you a hydroelectric dam that will electrify Central Africa in a fantastic place, zero carbon electricity, and it's only $30 billion. And so that's my proposition. And that's the kind of thing that we should be doing worldwide. And by the way, together with China, they have the Belt and Road. That's not bad, that's good. Thank you, China. You're financing infrastructure. Finance green infrastructure. Remember, no coal-fired power plants. Clean stuff. They've agreed to that. I spoke with them for 5 years, not just me. But they announced, okay, we don't fund any more coal projects. So they're a good partner for Europe. They could co-finance these projects. But the United States has this crazy idea. No, don't do that. They're our enemy. They're not the enemy. They're just another big part of the planet. So that's the idea.
Bueno, es muy sugerente.
Well, that's real suggestive. I mean, to understand that our progress is linked to the progress of our neighbor countries. This is something that we usually don't understand. We need urgent peace for a stability that allows us to build a global process and a social and overwhelming commitment in order to progress not only here but also in Africa, so that they can access clean energies and education. But Professor Sachs was speaking about knowledge and access to this knowledge, and in this sense there's a lot of discussion, and we've seen experts and scientists during these last days to raise their voices about the need of so that science and what we know from a scientific point of view can be important for the decision makers. We need its support. And in this call for science and this call for experts, we've tried to generate spaces where knowledge, science, the decision makers, and citizens too can find themselves in order to move on together. So one of these things has been this People Assembly that has been about acknowledging that we need all these stakeholders combined in the same direction. They are not only part of the same space, by the way. So, Ms. Vice President, you have led this process where many of us have participated. How do you assess this socialization process and the commitment towards a sustainable transformation? So, yeah, well, it's true that there are many people that have participated in this initiative, and I think that it has been an extraordinary initiative, and I think that it still has to deploy all its results. Why do I think that it's an extraordinary initiative? And of course, we were not the first ones. There are other countries that have done similar things, that are doing similar things. I was saying before that sometimes it's difficult for us to understand what we are speaking about. And if we don't have a social demand, social support, is very difficult to activate at the speed that we need to activate things at. We are fighting against time in terms of climate change, and this change basically affects every single aspect of our daily lives, but also the way our lives are structured, so as institutions, production, etc. And to change all this entails a great effort that can only be accomplished on the basis of a society that understands and claims for this to happen. So otherwise it would be easier to be aside and carpe diem and we'll see. And it's true that what has happened with the People Assembly in Spain is a great. It's really paradigmatic with compared to what has happened in other experiences. 100 people that have been randomly chosen, that have an average knowledge regarding this topic have the possibility of devoting some time to listen, to claim, to ask for more information, to discuss, to try to find where the difficulties could be, the sense of what we're doing, what we're not saying, what we are saying, with different points of view in every dimension of this climate reality. We are building a reflection, we are building a story that is really powerful, because when you get close to what you have in front of you, the first reaction when you deep dive a little bit is of a terrible scare. I mean, it's that's really general. It's, oh my God, what's this? Maybe we can do something else. But after you have moved on, the next question is, no, we can't be scared, because the question that it's important to devote time to, and the one that we want to be answered is, okay, so how can we solve this? And with two eyes and with a head that has not been working on this, the joint brain of all these citizens allows us to find things that sometimes fit with technical analysis, and sometimes they go beyond this technical analysis. I think that this is extremely valuable, and it really shows how this representation of this small country in such an assembly reflects what it would be the country if it had the chance of devoting time, effort, and to find the right inputs in order to generate this reflection. I think that is something new. I think that, we need to be very thankful, first of all, to the citizens that devoted a great part of their free time to think and to discuss on this, and of course the experts that were helping us with all this exercise. I think that we have a very long way to go. Of course, we need to follow their recommendations, but I think that there's very powerful capacity of being ambassadors in this public discussion. So everybody has endless relationships on a daily basis, endless connections from a labor or familiar point of view, and you have a lot of empowered people that understand and not necessarily think the same as other person that has participated in many other things. Maybe there are different nuances, but the main guidelines are really powerful. So I think that these are important experiences. So citizens, of course, are aware of their constitutional rights, their social obligations, that they will vote or not, but that's an aspect of participation. It's not about replacing the parliament, but it's about channeling a very powerful social demand. It's like, it's not enough to go and vote every 4 years. I want to be a critical citizen. I want to think, I want to propose. And in some way, you need to pay attention and you need to vindicate what are things that is important for the country. And in such a discussion, a new social contract in order to tackle the SDGs is really important. We know that this social contract is a contract among generations. We speak about climatic justice among generations or countries, but I think that it is also equity, consensus, justice among a group of people that live at the same time at spatial dimension that makes them become into a society. And I think that we can't ignore that. We need to participate in that discussion. We need to get involved as social animals as we are in order to improve what we want for our neighbors and our relatives and children. Yeah, you were saying that such a profound change needs this solid story that can only be told by social consultation. Decision makers and citizens, private sector, economy, academy, etc. work together, and we need a wide conversation with a plural point of view and with stakeholders that are willing to understand with each other, even with the ones that disagree with them, an intergenerational conversation. I want to say that 2030 agenda is a generational agreement of the ones that are here and have to make decisions and the ones that will suffer the consequences if we do not make the grade. So in order to hold this conversation, I would like to invite other actors, Minister Subirats, leaders from Talent for the Future, an entrepreneur, a woman entrepreneur that has the capability of leading the private sector, and a mayor, so that they can join us in order to increase this conversation and these points of view, in order to say that from this multidimensional point of view and from this multi-stakeholder point of view, we can generate this real transformation that we were speaking about. So please join us on the stage. Yes, I'll leave my place to the minister and I go to this chair, and I can see you all from here. So Minister, we'll get started by you, if you agree. So welcome, thank you very much for coming along. Professor Sachs at the beginning was saying that knowledge is absolutely key in order to move on in this transformation. And if SDSN is a network that is based on the academy, every public university in this country is on the network. We are trying that this knowledge is at the service of transformation and change. And I would like to reflect a little bit with you. We were speaking about the reports that UNESCO and other international bodies have put on the table. So how can we do so that universities, and we have Matthias and many other stakeholders that are making this possible at their universities, how can we make this possible so that universities align their knowledge in research and training and training of young people in this deep transformation? So how can we combine everything so that universities can be a relevant actor in this profound change that we need? Well, thank you very much for your invitation. We held a meeting with REDS some time ago regarding universities and SDGs. And later you were speaking about the report by the UNESCO that they presented at the international conference held in Barcelona less than a month ago about higher education, where there were three main goals related to higher education, universities and SDGs. First of all, it's everything that has to do with the elements that are really difficult of moving on in the academy. There's a sentence that says society has problems, university has departments. So I think that it's a sentence that really summarizes what we do in a much more difficult way when we say multidisciplinary, transdisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity. So how do we solve a complex problem in a complex way, and not to simplify, to segment it? And the trend that we have in the academy is in many cases to segment it, to break it down, and that's very difficult. The EU has been trying to have research approaches by challenges and not by disciplines, and we are dealing with all this. We need to come over this issue, and I think that this is quite important, because I think that the SDGs, well, in fact, the SDGs, well, it's a term that I liked, the report. This is a unifier challenge. I like this idea. It's a challenge that can't be assumed from disciplinary logics. I think that this is interesting, and this is not easy. It's very easy to say it, but the trends of how the academy works are important. I mean, so it's important to have all this into account. A second aspect, I'll try to be brief, is that we need to be able to understand, to come over the idea of transference, of the university thinks in transfers. So we need to think about exchange, to include the most Freirean idea. So everybody has knowledge. We need to accept the other's knowledge. We need to be able to compile traditions. I think that it was like showing that tradition of the common things that we have in the indigenous communities, that we have in the fishing banks, that we have in the different farmers' communities. I mean, it's something that could be defended in front of the tragedy of the common thing, that was the classic thing that had been defended. I think that's very important. So examples. Short ago, on the newspaper, there was an article that I liked a lot, about some archaeologists from the University of Granada that had worked with the farmers' community from Alpujarras and Sierra Nevada to recover all the ditches that have been built during the 13th and 14th century. And these were archaeologists that were working with environmentalists and farmers in order to recover a millennial tradition that had been lost. And thanks to this recovery, the farmers' communities felt empowered and able to give an answer to all this. I think that it's a good example. And on the report that I'm speaking about, it was a more political way to say this. We need to overcome the colonial language. Regarding knowledge, we need to have a post-colonial logic, and we need to accept. I mean, why is this important? Because otherwise, we are generating an incommunication. And the non-acceptance of tradition is an incommunication. And how can we recover this tradition? And how we include this with new goals? I think that this is another important topic. And the third aspect, and now I'm done with this, is everything that has to do with the goal 17. This idea of overcoming, of mixing, articulating universities with social actors. That can be either cities, I was speaking to the mayor before, either cities or other stakeholders. For example, now I'm going to, this would be a piece of ad about the new law of universities that is about to be passed at the cabinet. So it's full of elements that are linked to SDGs, and one of the important things is citizen science. It is key because it means to include people's knowledge in the dynamics, not in terms of exchange, but to build knowledge and to build solutions that are linked to problems. So let me repeat it. All these terms, post-colonial terms of knowledge exchange, etc., and networks with stakeholders in order to build things together. And it's possible to do this, and we have examples that we can work on with REDS in order to launch all this and to find specific examples to make all this benchmarking logic to progress, to move on with positive experiences that we can work together on.
La propuesta, porque sabes.
We are picking up your glove because the understanding of the trend changes that we are seeing, because as we know, the 2030 agenda already told us that we cannot deal with each of the goals separately. You cannot improve education without improving gender equality and vice versa. And also, we need to put an end of this silos where engineers are only working with engineers. We need all this collective thinking working together towards the same mission, and that mission needs to be a collective one. That is to say, not only the academy and the public sector, but also the citizens need to be involved in this mission. And this is also a cross-generational mission, because as we know, and as science has stated clearly, are not going to be seen by us, but by future generations. This is not by chance that the most demanding movements are young people's movements who are pushing for the future, because you're saying that you're not talents for the future, you're citizens of the present that want to be involved in what's going on, so to build the future. And I would like you to explain how from your organization you're trying to generate the spaces for your generation to get involved and get the collective knowledge and be part of that collective action that we need to be built. Yes, that's right. We are more critical with other generations and with ourselves. And this is the inception of our movement. We young people consider ourselves as a vulnerable community, or that has not been listened to as much as we think we should have been up until now. So we start demonstrating, we are present in social media, and we are very present in the social media actually, but this is not enough. So instead of just keep on complaining, we're going to be self-critical, and we need to start thinking, what can we do? All these words, advocacy, lobbying, we're not using these words. We should start using these words and trying to exhaust this path. And if we cannot use these paths, they're not fruitful, then we can go onto the streets and start demonstrating. So that's the initial idea. We need to do something that goes beyond the political party's action. But as citizens, when we want to participate, we need to have the platform to participate. And this was the basis for us to start gathering the opinions of the whole of the youth. And we started in a twofold way. We have a very dynamic methodology, so that a person having 3 minutes, 6 months, 1 hour can actually participate and tell us from their viewpoint what their opinion is on anything, whether it is circular economy or climate change or the institutions, any topic. This methodology not only enables everyone to tell me what they want to tell me, but it also enables us for it to have a technical validity, because it allows us to consult with experts that can tell us if this is viable or not. And once that we have determined the viability from the technical viewpoint, and this is something that differentiates us from other groups, we have to deal with the cross-generational aspect. We call it the contrast phase, because we contrast this information with the public institutions and with other social institutions that might not be specifically made of young people, and we want to listen to them and hear their opinions on what we tell them, because they might tell us, this is a great idea, but unfortunately is totally unviable. And so for us, this cross-generational aspect is absolutely key. And we cannot work on our own, just by ourselves, what we really want to do. We are an association, but we also see ourselves as a platform. We deliver documents such as these, or the pact that could have not been reached without these alliances. We are focusing in particular on the SDGs. We are 90 organizations from the civil society that trust that the young people need to be represented in the decision making within the societies, and we need to channel all their efforts so that we can listen to the young people's voices, and also that these voices are taken into account, not only listened to. So the methodology is key, that enabling everyone to participate, whether they are in Madrid or in a very small town in the north of Spain, and also counting on the alliances. Well, at the end of the day, these are two key aspects that we have dealt with this afternoon. And I like it in particular that you've mentioned that you demand things, but you are also committed. This is a methodology that enables this participation to be viable. And also I liked that you mentioned that you are looking for the technical aspects that make these ideas viable, to incorporate your generation as the SDSN does is important. We are looking for this cross-generational pact, this exchange of different outviews. And within this pact, we need also to take to bring on board different actors. We have talked about the public sector, we have talked about the youth, and I would like to also incorporate to the discussion the private sector and the entrepreneurship. I would like to talk with Maria Alvarez. She is an old friend of mine. She has pushed many projects from the private sector, and also regarding one of the comments that Jeffrey made about the report from this year regarding the 8th goal, regarding the appropriate employment, and regarding also to wages equality among women and men, which is one of the goals that we are more far from achieving. There are certain steps that are being taken, such as the labor reform that we are seeing in Spain, but there are other things that can be done from your initiatives, from your platform, and you have led a proposal for change, a proposal to change to a 4 working day week. And I would like to you to explain a bit your proposal that goes beyond this proposal of the working hours, and how you have implemented this in the real world and the impact that it has had. Well, I have to say that this is the first time that I come to a round table, and I'm the younger one. And also you have called me an elderly person, so I really appreciate that in a sort of way. Well, the truth is that when we go to places and as entrepreneurs, and we do not follow the typical roles, and they call us the exception, but we're not the exception. We started implementing the 4 working days in a company devoted to the hotel sector. We were handling actually 3 restaurants in our company, and during the lockdown, ourselves and all the population made a great effort to face the pandemic, and I don't think that we have acknowledged this collective effort that we made to get past the pandemic, and we promised ourselves that we would come out better. This is the promise that we made ourselves. Let's make a big effort, because we're going to change and we're going to solve all the things that are not working at this moment of paralysis. And when we came out of the pandemic, we felt very connected with this promise that we had made ourselves. My partner and myself, as entrepreneurs, we felt that we needed to fulfill this promise, and also we understood that from the political side, it was very difficult to take risks, because we have become a society that really punishes the mistakes that we make from the political side, which leaves you very little margin for action. So it makes sense that it's the private sector that takes risks, and that there are examples such as ourselves who are taking the initiative in this sector. Nowadays, we still have not fulfilled this promise. And I think that part of the anger that we feel in the society has to do with not being able to fulfill this promise. And I liked something that the Vice President said, that we need to socialize, democratize the benefits. We need to make these benefits to put them at hand of the whole of the society. And one of the things that we can do is start with the 4 working day working week. They called me crazy when we started out with this initiative, but up until then, it's true that there were very few initiatives in this sense. It was not on the table, but we look back, that there is a pilot project that is going to be implemented in Spain, also in the United Kingdom, in Belgium as well. Telefónica has been the first big company in Spain that has taken steps towards this working hours, and so this is one of the first things that we can do in order to fulfill the promise that we had made ourselves as a society. And profiting from the time that I have been given here, I wanted to mention something. One of the ideas that I kept going on back to was an idea that I got from the Iberdrola campus in 2019. There was somebody, Gorka Spiau, who talked about this idea of socializing the benefits, and also there was Kirsten Dunlop, I think, who spoke about the need of making radical transformations, not really gradually, but transformations that really affected lives of people. What my employees tell me when we discuss the 4 working day week, they tell me that this has changed their lives, and I really encourage you to implement it.
Que cuando se es valiente se cambian cosas, sino también de que el trabajo en...
So the work in Reds from this acceleration process that we are dealing with is being really fruitful. So we have talked about the private sector, public sector, academia, young people, but the Vice President was saying something at the beginning of the conversation that is being really important. It's the need of setting a context about the transformations. We need to transform all this. We need to transform clean energy, etc. And we need to look for the territorial context and to take cities and rural areas into account. And one of the main allies of Reds and have been city councils and local governments. And these have been the main engines. And we needed to have a mayor here. We have the mayor from Fuenlabrada. We need to share experiences about the exchange of knowledge, about different territorial realities, and I would like you to explain about this experience, about this commitment of different city councils working together in order to accomplish this social transformation, and how do you see this from the closest point of view? Well, first of all, thank you very much. Good evening, and thanks for the invitation. I'd like to say hello from Abel Caballero, the FEMP chairman, and it's great, well, not that I'm here, but it's great to have the local representation here. I think that it's key that in such an important topic that it really conditions our lives, city councils, that in the end, it is where we are the ones that work in a very close way. Everything that we've been talking about here has to be translated for citizens. I'm sure that there are organized civil societies that are committed, but for example, our neighbor in our building of Street X, he doesn't know what SDGs are, and I think that we have the responsibility of conveying all this. So for this, the FEMP has the great commitment since 2019. We created the commission, and we work with work commissions where we have 25 city councils in every commission and a specific commission of SDGs and Agenda 2030. And we have some colleagues that work directly to contribute to this agenda, to contribute to everything that is being said, because this changes and it increases as time goes by, and we want to improve the results that we have been seeing a while ago. And we create a network of local entities with the 2030 agenda. And we have close to 400 municipalities with that represent almost 26 million citizens. So I think that in some way we are an authorized voice in order to contribute and in order to in some way manage what we are speaking about. And in some way we have the responsibility through political leaderships. And I think that this is key. I'm here to speak about to speak on behalf of FEMP, but I come from Fuenlabrada and I have to say something about Fuenlabrada because otherwise I couldn't go back. But well, here, very important things have been said. We've been speaking about participation and agreement, consensus. Let me put it this way. I don't know if you saw that Fuenlabrada is a candidate to be the European capital for young people in 2025. The people that rule have the obligation of setting milestones that encourage people to reach consensus. We, at the plenary session, we have been able to reach a consensus, and well, it's a municipality, but we've been able to reach an agreement regarding this goal by the regional parliament in Madrid, and we will keep on working at the national parliament. I think that we have the need of setting milestones and to put our effort on that, where everything's a criticism. If you say white, I say black. I think that I don't know if we will be the European capital for young people in 2025 or not. We hope so, but if not, I think that we've made something great, and this is to bring together all decisions by other parties, other ideas, in some way that our city is stronger. But in the same way, I was saying that reading the newspapers, the minister said on Saturday we appeared on a piece of news because 1,000 boys and girls came together, 16 and 17 years old. You can imagine 1,000 boys and girls doing contributions to what they want in the city. And they have made around 3,000 contributions, 3,000 ideas, so that the people in charge, it's ourselves, can make this come true. So I want to draw to conclusion that if the people get a loudspeaker, people will speak. I think that we have the need and responsibility as municipalities of doing this. We have the need and responsibility of conveying this to this federation of municipalities. It is where we put all this in common. By the way, we are part of other international organizations, and CGLU, for example, and we were UCLG, and we were. They congratulated us on the contribution that we do to the governments of Spain. So there's a part that is designed by the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and Provinces. So I think that, it's very interesting to listen to all the speakers, and the offering by the FEMP, by all the mayors in Spain. We are delighted to contribute everything we can towards these SDGs, to this route that has been set. We think that we are the closest side to the citizens, and we think that we need to keep on working on that. By the way, Javier, you were speaking about something. This great transformation that we need, in the end, has to be seen as a common mission of a full community. And when people have a common mission, they work together. And when they feel this as a common mission, they work together, no matter it is to become into the European city for the young people, or to make a transformation. We need to build all this so that people can understand this. I don't know, Ms. Vice President or Jeff, if you have any remark or anything that you can draw out of this conversation. Yes? Yeah. I was thinking that you were going to ask more people. Yeah, I was going to ask more people, but I wanted to know if there was something missing. Otherwise, we can open the Q&A.
Adelante, Jeff.
I just want to say that we really need to take these lessons from Spain through SDSN to other parts of the world, because what we're hearing is really incredibly innovative, and new institutional ideas, new approaches, new ways of aggregating people, working across generations and so on. And this is SDSN's purpose, is a global network, and you're doing great things, and I want to make sure, and we have a vice president from, of course, Maria Cortes Puig, who's not only phenomenal, but she's also the vice president for networks. So, Maria, what an incredible resource.
Bueno, muchas gracias, María. Nos ponemos a trabajar.
Thank you, Maria. We'll start working not to share experiences with other networks. I wanted to open this Q&A session to wrap up with two people that have been directly involved in two bets and two examples that we've tackled this evening. On the one hand, Hannah was one of the citizens that randomly was chosen to participate in this citizen assembly process, and she participated directly with the group of experts in order to propose changes regarding a fight against climate change. And Hannah, I would like you to explain what has been your experience, and how did you, from your point of view, how did you see this first thing that you had the chance of participating? Thank you very much for coming along. Oh, thank you very much to everybody. My experience, amazing. Just one word, amazing. I have no other word to define this. I'm a regular person. I haven't studied anything about climate or anything like that. And during all these 8 months, hand in hand with the best experts that someone can have next to me, we've learned great things, and we are not blind anymore. I think that citizens need to know what's going on, and as happened with the pandemic, where everybody knew what was going on. Everybody knows everything, and I think that we need to do something with this, from my point of view. And by the way, Hannah, when you were saying that you were not blind anymore, I think that you mean that maybe you had a preconceived idea, or with some prejudices, and you realized that it had nothing to do with that, right? I had no idea. The first two sessions, as the vice president has said, it's like I got scared. It's like, what the hell is this? For God's sake, what's going on? So I think that, as happened with me, I think that quite a high percentage of citizens don't know what's going on. It's a reality. It's a very good experience, right? To move from your house as a spectator when you are called to participate, right, and to propose. Things change, right? Wow, humongously, I could say. And I have several questions that are blowing my mind. There's a word that is really scary for society, and this is decreasing. Decreasing, it's a very dangerous word. So what does decrease entail? I mean, will we lose our quality of life or not? Because it is a word that is a scary word. Jeff, I think that, of course, the Vice President too, but I think that you could answer this question. When we speak to the citizens about this change, this necessary change of our economic model, consumption model, production model, that sometimes it's not well understood by citizens in terms of what's going to happen with this. So will this have an impact on my well-being, on the way I enjoy life? How can we explain this with a message that is clear for our citizens?
Can I ask a question first?
Of course.
Did the group meet for 8 months coming in person or online or a mix?
Mixed, ¿no? Bueno, presencial.
Solo.
Sí, puedes explicar un poco.
Please, can you explain how the process were? What the process was like? It was 6 sessions. 5 of them were by Zoom.
Y se pudo,
And we were able to make it. 100 people. Wow, amazing. And the last one was face-to-face. And we had this reality impact. It was this 100% of saying, what's this? But you can do a Zoom call with 100 people. There were more than 100 people that had the experts, facilitators. And I repeat this again, they are great people, by the way.
To do this in the United States. And I thought it was a fantastic potential. And then everyone else made it so complicated, we never did it. But now that I know it's done, you did it, and 8 months on climate, actually. Because this is exactly what I wanted to do. And they told me, no, and it costs too much. I said, just Zoom. Zoom's not so complicated, right? Bravo. Okay, I'm a happy person, honestly. Because actually, SDSN has, how many chapters do we have, national chapters? 50.
Yeah.
We should promote a citizens' assembly in 50 countries along the Spanish model. It works, right? And the experts can be anywhere also. So we have a global network of experts that can... This is wonderful. Bravo. Okay.
Vicepresidenta, podemos compartir el modelo con...
So, Ms. Vice President, we can share this model with other countries.
Really, life can be not only saving the planet, but really much better. And the 4-day work week is an example of that. People used to work 7 days a week, 15 hours a day on heavy labor and chores and so forth. And poor people work like that, very poor people, to stay alive. But because of the things we know, the technology, the ability to do things, we could actually have 4-day work weeks and a better balance of work and life. And you just walk around this beautiful city and there's a lot of good quality of life here. People are outside, they're walking, they're eating high trophic food, fantastic things. So, of course, we can actually use all this know-how for better. And that's the bottom line. There is nothing, what we need to do is less greenhouse gases, less carbon emissions. We don't even need less energy, by the way, as long as it's coming from sunshine. Still, there's lots of sunshine for another 5 billion years. It's okay. So we're good with that. And so the real point is to harness our know-how and to do it in a way that you're doing it also, to bring everyone into this so that this is really a group effort and people are not frightened by it in the end. But thank you for the example and the inspiration. Extremely important. I may quote you a few times in the coming days and weeks. I hope that's okay.
Presidenta, ¿querías?
Sí, quería hacer dos comentarios. Uno, explicarle a Jeff.
Sí, quería hacer, I wanted to make two comments. I wanted to explain, Jeff, that I gave the extraordinary award on environment to certain experts. And this is because, not only because they made, it's not about Zoom working, it's about two things. It's about people arriving there ready to listen and ready to learn and share. You need an open mind from the citizens. If you are closed in your own ideas, it's very difficult to have a rich debate. It's very difficult to impose anything on the citizens, and all these facilitators need to be very reliable in the questions that they present, but they also need to be very respectful when they're creating a debate, so for them to flow easily. So that we decided that we would give them this award because it's a very serious citizenship commitment from everyone. And I think that worked really well because it's been 8 months, 6 full weekends with homework for everyone to do. It was not just about 2 hours here and there over Zoom. And I think this action created a dynamic that is that opens the path for new things. And before, everything was held in an on-site manner, and where you could see people and read their body language. And in this case, we had to focus people on the screens and having a proper debate. There are other things regarding other topic that we are seeing that have brought us here and that might not take us far, however. And there are two issues that I would like to discuss. The formal one is that for a long time we have had a biased idea of what the well-being or knowledge or growing or prosperity mean, and it's hard to rebuild these concepts. So we need to understand that maybe being prosper doesn't mean to consume further. Or we can see, for instance, that when we cut a forest, generates certain growth in the GDP, but when we protect the forest, we do not see any positive results in the GDP. So maybe we need to understand that GDP is very useful, but we need to take a wider approach. Jeff is something that he has worked on. He has worked on Bhutan on the happiness index. This is something that they created in Bhutan. And there are other elements that are important to take into account. For instance, the way that we measure inequalities, not only how we measure the added value, but also how the distributive element is taken into account. And also we have learned something that was really obvious, but we just learned. We believed ourselves to be superheroes, and we realized that the planet has its limits. The capacity of being able to create resources in order to keep on creating this growth is limited. So we need not to overpass these limits. So when Jeff told us that when we talk about energy and we learn about the ways of creating this energy in a sustainable manner, we might not see such restrictions that we have right now. Maybe we will have certain constraints, but not as profound. And so we need to have a debate that probably has to do with the meaning. Can we talk about growth? I think it's licit to talk about quality of life, for instance. But there's a bottom line debate that entails what this all means, what means to have a satisfactory way of living without really using up all the resources. We cannot drink up the water that our grandchildren will need. We cannot leave overexploited soils for them so that they cannot grow new crops in the future. So this is all part of the big debate, the collective challenge that we are all seeing. For in our generation, even if we have are of different ages, I think this is a big debate, but this will have to be discussed in a different panel because we're running out of time. But it's true, we need to consider how to take into account all the resources towards building the future. I would like to highlight that REDS has participated, and also the SDSN, supporting the process that we were discussing right now. We were talking about the citizens' participation, and we see that there's a civil society that has been accompanying this change and that has overcome this silos-based society. And one of the processes that they have supported is the unification of different NGOs that were working in different fields, and that they understood that they needed to put their forces together, their strengths together, organizations that came from international cooperation or gender equality. And so we would like to give the floor to Futuro en Común, who have been working also very intensely on the 2030 agenda, so that they can tell us what their experience has been in terms of organizing this participation that incorporates so many different outviews. Well, I will not introduce Futuro en Común because Leire has already done that. Thank you for allowing me to participate here. There's very little to add after listening to this great panel that we have today. So maybe the only thing that we can do is to highlight some of the things that Futuro en Común considers that are very important and that you have already discussed. You were talking about finding ourselves in a crossing of different paths. The back steps that we have taken in some of the challenges that were presented in the 2030 agenda. We understand that this is a roadmap that has become more urgent for everyone, but also we might not share with the vision that has been given here, and is that we think that it might not be a priority from the political view or in terms of the translation of the 2030 agenda into the policies that are implemented at a national level. And also, I think we are losing consensus, and we think that this was one of the pillars that gave legitimacy to this agenda. So Mr. Sachs and the report called on mobilizing the resources at a global level, but we also understand that we need to mobilize the political will. And we think these two ideas go hand in hand. We think that it's extremely important that from your positions at an international level, that you push this political will in order to fight the multilateralism and all the building of agendas that go against the 2030 agenda. And we see that this is reaching a great percentage of the population, not only in Spain, but also in other countries. It has also been mentioned that it's impossible to have certain wealthy islands. We cannot talk about countries that are more developed and less developed. We need to have a global effort, and as we have seen through the different interventions here, we see that many countries that are coming out very well off after the pandemic, they're actually acting against the other countries and making those other countries find it more difficult to come out of this situation. From Futuro en Común, we are calling for the incorporation of exchanges between countries, between generations, in order to plan the development and in order to measure the development. I'm going to stop you here. Sorry, we're going to keep these two ideas. The mobilization of the political will is one of the first ideas, and also the feeling that we're all on the same ship and that the progress needs to reach everyone or nobody will actually progress. So we will keep on working with Futuro en Común, and I would like to leave the floor to the Secretary of State for 2030 agenda, because we started talking about two elements from the report, the how to measure their development and how to measure the political will of the countries. And I think that the political will is measured by the legislation. And also when you give priority to certain agendas. Spain was one of the first countries that created a ministry of the 2030 agenda, and we would like to invite the Secretary of State of this ministry, with whom we have been working for a long time already. And I would also like to thank the whole team of Reds, a small team with Candela as the head of the team. And despite their being so small, they can actually multiply their commitment and organize this type of events. So, Enrique, the floor is yours. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you very much, first of all, for inviting us to the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, to the presentation of the yearly report of 2022. I would also like to thank you for promoting this dialogue about a new social contract and a global pact that has the whole of the society working around the fulfillment of the SDGs. And this is done over the main pillars regarding the productive models, the social aspects, etc. We need alliances that encompass the government, the academia, the scientific society, the civil society, and above all, the younger people who need to be part of the making of the decisions that will affect them. We also want to highlight the importance of the creation of alliances that might accelerate the achievement of the SDGs at an international level, and the proposal of promoting a global plan to fund the achievement of the SDGs instead of funding wars by, among other resources, the increase of the development aid or the refinancing of the debt for low-income countries, the increase of the credit given by the multilateral banks or the IMF, and the assessment agencies regarding their assessments on the debt of the countries. In the report, we see that after the pandemic, the goals of the agenda seem less important, and to this we need to add the inflation and the debt crisis. The international community needs to try and drive the refocusing of the SDGs as a priority, and to work for the collaboration among countries, among peoples. And it is very good news that Spain has gone up 4 positions out of 163 countries. Spain is on the 16th position. And also I would like to highlight the report of Yale that shows that in 2020 Spain has shown an improvement from, I think we are in the 83rd position. We have improved 40 plus positions, and this shows that this task has been recently undertaken again by this government, as opposed to what had been done with previous governments. So we see that there's an improvement in terms, globally speaking, in all of SDGs, and we accept 2. And we also get a good grade in the implementation of the policies aiming at these goals. To be among the top countries, it's a real honor, and this is due to the fact that we have the resources and the means and the specific strategies to implement these SDGs in all public policies. And it is a source of pride for our Secretary of State, because this is partly due to our work, especially in a crisis context, in an environment of systemic crisis that can actually impair our efforts towards achieving and accomplishing these goals. So what we need to do is to align all policies with the goals of the 2030 agenda, and also with the commitments that we have internationally in terms of environmental sustainability, among others. The SDGs are not based on air, they are actually based on the Human Rights Declaration and all the different conventions that have made them more specific, and all these conventions are binding for the signing states. The pandemic has also shown the fundamental role of the public institutions to fight vulnerability by ensuring social rights. The countries that have invested the most in social services have had the better capacity for responding to this crisis, and the government of Spain is very proud of having done so, and we are pleased with the fact that the United Nations has acknowledged the social shield that we had in our country as one of the best practices in the international community to ensure that in the fight against COVID-19, nobody was left behind. And we are sure that when we get further reports about what went on in 2021, we will see even more clearly the efforts that Spain has made in order to accomplish these SDGs. And the Secretary of State also is in line with the request of having a new social contract for the whole of humanity in order to achieve the 17 SDGs, by making the content of these SDGs a commitment that needs to be shared by the governments, by the peoples, in order to live in a more sustainable and fair world. And we need also to include the means to fight natural catastrophes and fighting the human and fundamental rights, fighting hunger and sickness, non-treatable diseases, but curable diseases, and also trying to fight massive migrations due to the lack of resources, and also for the ensuring of the access of drinking water. And all these things need to be backed by certain guarantees. And anything that threatens the life on our planet should also be considered illicit, because the defense of the common good and the common resources and the fight for peace and against inequalities are the only ways to fight and to end hunger and curable diseases. We need a new social contract that has politics ruling over economy and not the other way around, that will not permit the financial powers ruling over the political powers by dictating the rules and the laws and the actions that are carried out by the governments. And to achieve this new social contract, we need to push policies that are aimed at improving people's daily lives. And this is the best path so that the citizens can see the value of the 2030 agenda. It also requires to incorporate scientific knowledge in the decision making, which is something that is already taking place in the public administrations, but we need to strengthen it in order to better guide the public decision making, and also to avoid all these negationists or denial actions from many extreme right-wing parties, both in Spain and abroad. And we need to place 2030 agenda at the heart of the policies, can also take into account the impact of the COVID-19, but it also enables us to implement recovery plans that allow us to rebuild the global economies affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and now these economies affected by the crisis of the war of Ukraine. This is why we need to end this war with a negotiated solution that ensures peace, negotiation, safety for all peoples in Europe, preventing the spread of an armed conflict that would put at risk the achievement of the SDGs, in particular in this context where there's a great risk of nuclear catastrophe that is not such a remote idea or a remote risk. So this does not need to be a reason for selling PPEs at extraordinary costs, but instead to push social policies, environmental policies, working policies that are fairer both at a country level and at an international level in order to create further resilience for future crises. And it's crazy to believe that any given country can achieve the SDGs on their own, ignoring that everything that any country does can affect the whole of the global community. So thanks, Reds, for their work, for bringing us closer to achieving the SDGs. And thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. It has been a pleasure to be able to close it today. Thank you very much.